Sorry, can't be with you in person today. A few things I wanted to stress. It's 20 years since the war. Two generations have grown up and are growing up since that time. And many people have either no memory of the war because it's not talked about much, or when they talk about it, they know something terrible happened, but they don't know why, and no one encourages them to ask why. So, for all those born since the Iraq War, let me say this. The Iraq War took place because the United States had now reached a stage in global politics where they wanted to experiment a bit more to establish their hegemony and their empire. Some people say it isn't an empire, but you look at the state of the world today on virtually every continent, and you can see where they are intervening either directly or via sanctions or threatening countries. In fact, the United States empire is much, much stronger and cares very little for world public opinion compared to the Cold War days of the last century. So why did they decide to go to war? Because they decided, in the words of one senior Bush administration person, we could do it. And Wolfowitz established what was known then, and still exists, by the way, that's how they function, the Wolfowitz doctrine. He said any time a country poses a threat to us or is misbehaving or threatening our interests, or we think it is, we'll go and take them out. Exact words, or virtually the same. I don't have it in front of me. So Iraq was unfinished business for the Bush administration. His father had invaded Iraq during the Gulf War, Bush Sr., and decided that he didn't want to topple a regime because the toppling of a regime and its entire apparatus creates chaos and misery. And they didn't need to, because Saddam was playing ball with them for a long time. This would keep him quiet, the Gulf War. Bush Jr., after 9/11, was in a different mood. He said, let's go and take him out. They actually thought of invading Iraq even before they invaded Afghanistan. For that country's invasion, the fig leaf was Al-Qaeda was based there. But when the Taliban said, let's see the evidence that this was ordered by the people staying in our country, they were told to get stuffed. And NATO went in. Operation Enduring Freedom. There was a debate within the Bush administration. Should we invade Iraq first? And people said, but Iraq has nothing to do with the 9/11 bombings of the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. And the reply was, this is the way we can sort out the world now. These bombings have taken place. And senior people said no one is going to believe us, because whatever else Saddam Hussein is or was, he was never a jihadi terrorist, never. So it'll make us look foolish. Let's take out Afghanistan first. And the second war was the Iraq War. Now, in carrying out the Iraq War, Bush was very cocky. He basically said to Blair, we know that your country is against it. A majority of your citizens don't want it. Don't worry, we don't need you. You don't have to come with us. We can do it on its own, do it on our own. And Bush said, this is our pattern. If we can use the United Nations Security Council, we're happy to use it. If we need to use NATO, there are no differences in NATO, we'll use them. If we can't go with our favorite ally, and trusted ally, Britain, we can do it on our own. So please don't take this personally. But if you have to save yourself by staying in power, then we'll do it. But Blair was very insistent that British troops had to be involved. Very insistent indeed. And so they were involved. NATO was split. The Germans refused to back the war. The French refused to back the war. The French conservative president Chirac said no. And when he went to Algeria for a state visit, he was greeted by hundreds and thousands of Algerians saying thank you. Whereas Jospin and his successors, the Socialist Party, went to call on the United States ambassador and said, had we been in power, we would have had troops on the ground like Britain. We just want you to know that. We're leaving aside troops on the ground, the Socialist Party's own troops have faded away. They're on 5%, and as a political force, they've been wiped out. Second point I want to make is this. People often ask, but, despite the huge demonstrations all over Europe, nothing happened. Well, nothing happened because the demonstrations were not demonstrations of dual power. They were demonstrations, I have often referred to them, preemptive demonstrations to try and stop the war. We'd never done that before in the history of the world peace movement. Mass mobilizations, 1.5 million in London, nearly 2 million in Madrid, 2 million in Italy, hundreds of thousands in Germany. American cities packed with demonstrators. New York, 200,000. LA, 250,000. Smaller state capitals, hundreds of thousands. So in the United States and Britain, the main warmongers, the size of the demonstrations were huge. Now, given that that is all we had, we were a moral force representing a majority of public opinion in many parts of the world. There was no way we could enforce what we wish to enforce. We don't have state power. But what was very interesting was that the ruling elites, backed by state institutions of every sort, basically said, it doesn't matter if millions oppose this war, we're going to do it. And that also marked something which we are now witnessing every day, which is the decline and deterioration of the democratic system in many, many parts of the world. So I don't talk about it because it's so obvious. Over 2 million Iraqis killed, 5 million Iraqi orphans, millions of Iraqi refugees scattered all over the Middle East, different parts of the world. What have they gained through this war? They've gained a few oil companies, true, but that wasn't the main purpose. The main purpose was to assert US hegemony and never mind how many die. And that is why these lessons from those wars, Syria was invaded 13 years ago. There are still US troops refusing to leave that country. Libya destroyed and replaced. Gaddafi publicly lynched with Hillary Clinton saying, we came, we saw, he died. This is the so-called feminist Democrat Secretary of State in the Obama administration. The French and the British went in to fight the war. The Germans refused. So now there's mega pressure being put on using Putin's crazed adventure in the Ukraine to toughen up NATO a bit. Let's go and fight, the Germans are told. We'll show you how to fight again. You don't know how to fight. You think I'm being sarcastic. I give you my word, at a big public event in Berlin soon after the Iraq War, where I was debating, I forget her complete name. Ruth was her first name. She was the legal advisor from Yale on Rumsfeld's in the Department of Defense. And she actually, in the debate with me in Berlin before a packed crowd of German Foreign Office officials, she said, what I don't understand about you Germans is why you're so scared of war. And the whole audience went, oh, you're saying this to us? And the senior figure in the German Foreign Office came up to me and said, Herr Ali, thank you for your wise words. Listening to your opponent today was for us Germans an anthropological experience. So this drive to unite Europe behind the United States for every single war has received a terrible boast in the Ukraine. It won't last, in my opinion. The divisions are still there. And these divisions won't be overcome easily. And there have been big demonstrations in Berlin and German cities saying we don't want to be escalated into a new war by the United States. And even in France and Italy, divisions are emerging. In Britain, alas, while we were very successful during the Iraq War, 60 Labour MPs opposed the war. Not a single Labour MP was told. We have to acknowledge this. Blair and his minions didn't tell a single MP, if you go on the anti-war demo or sign a resolution against the war, we're going to expel you from the Labour Party. This is a new innovation that has now been introduced as the Labour Party continues to deteriorate and the Labour left effectively capitulates. So many lessons can be learned about what shouldn't be done and what should be done when wars are being waged, and they are still being waged today. So the Iraq War was the beginning of a process that has not yet come to an end. And this century, I think, is going to see a conflict of some sort between China and the United States of America. It is going to see that the Americans have made it clear, and so much so that they're worrying some of their own supporters and ideologues. The Financial Times had a piece by their correspondent who's worked a lot in the United States, and he said, let's just pose a question. If China was a democracy with a two-party system like in the United States, would they threaten it? Yes. He said if China had the same amount of freedom of press, freedom in terms of newspapers and television media that the United States have, would the United States threaten it? Yes. If China stopped behaving badly towards ethnic minorities, though here too, he said, the United States has taught lessons given its long rule over the black people in their own country. Would the Chinese be threatened if they suddenly became good? He said yes. In other words, these ideological arguments have very little to do with the American empire, its strategy, and its policies. And it's sad, and I end on this, it's sad that all those who marched with us against Iraq, against other wars in solidarity with Palestine, have suddenly got stuck and are not participating in campaigns to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. Thank you.